The cold air rolls off the North Shore Mountains, curling over Vancouver's skyline and settling inside BC Place. The stadium is empty for now, just the echo of maintenance crews and the flicker of digital billboards being tested. Yet in less than a year, this quiet shell will become the beating heart of world football. 67,000 fans, a sea of red and white, flags draped across shoulders, faces painted, drums pulsing like thunder. The sound will rise, stretch beyond the roof, and spill out into the city, marking the moment Canada steps fully onto the global stage. For decades, this scene would have seemed like fantasy. Hockey was Canada's religion. Football, soccer, was an afterthought, something you played in schoolyards or on uneven community fields before switching to the ice. But now, the country that once looked outward to admire others' footballing, Cultures is preparing to host the world's greatest sporting spectacle, and not as a guest, not as an afterthought, but as a true football nation. It's June 2026. The opening ceremony is moments away. Alphonso Davies stands in the tunnel, his breath steady, his mind flashing through every frozen morning in Edmonton, every coach who told him that Canada wasn't ready for this. Behind him, Jonathan David adjusts his armband, eyes narrowed in focus. Ahead, through the floodlights, lies destiny. But before this night of spectacle and roar, before the red maple leaf was raised alongside the flags of football giants, there was a story of quiet beginnings, a decades-long struggle fought on half-frozen pitches and in boardrooms where belief was in short supply. To understand how Canada arrived here, to understand why this World Cup feels different, you have to rewind through the snow, the skepticism, and the sparks that lit the path. It begins not with a superstar, but with a question: how does a hockey nation learn to dream in football? In the late 20th century, Canadian football was a paradox. The country had qualified for one Men's World Cup in 1986, yet failed to score a single goal. It wasn't a failure of heart, it was a failure of infrastructure, of belief. Youth programs were fragmented, coaching systems inconsistent, and funding sporadic. For many, soccer was a seasonal hobby, not a professional ambition. The media barely noticed, and when they did, it was to marvel that anyone cared at all. Yet, beneath the surface, something was stirring. Immigrant communities from Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America kept the game alive in city parks and gravel fields. Toronto's suburbs buzzed with pickup games in summer twilight, while in Vancouver, kids from every corner of the globe shared the same worn-out balls and muddy shoes. Soccer was quietly becoming the connective tissue of modern Canada, a language spoken in hundreds of accents, but with one shared dream. The 1994 World Cup in the United States sparked something deeper. North America could host, could fill stadiums, could care. Slowly, whispers began to grow. Maybe one day, Canada could do the same. It would take decades, but the seed had been planted. Fast forward to 2012. The Canadian Soccer Association, rebranding as Canada Soccer, unveiled a plan few took seriously at the time: long-term player development, nationwide coaching certification, and the eventual creation of a professional domestic league. It sounded ambitious, almost naive, in a country where most children still chased pucks rather than passes. But leadership figures like Victor Montagliani believed the transformation had to start somewhere. "If we want to matter," he said, "we can't wait for the world to notice. We have to build the world we want." And then came the generation that changed everything. In Edmonton, a refugee kid from Ghana named Alphonso Davies sprinted past everyone, on snow, on turf, barefoot when he had to. In Ottawa, a quiet teenager named Jonathan David spent hours studying European strikers online, replicating their movements in local parks. In Brampton, Tajon Buchanan practiced cutting inside until the motion became instinctive. These weren't players groomed by privilege or elite academies. They were shaped by hardship, multicultural roots, and relentless drive. By the time Davies signed for Bayern Munich and David joined Lille, Canada's football identity had shifted. Suddenly, the maple leaf wasn't a novelty, it was a symbol of potential. And at the center of this transformation stood John Herdman, the fiery English coach who had already taken the Canadian women's team to Olympic glory. When he took over the men's side in 2018, many doubted him. But Herdman didn't see a lost cause. He saw a nation ready to believe. His first task wasn't tactical. It was emotional. He had to rebuild pride. "We're not here to participate," he told his players. "We're here to compete." The slogan spread through training camps and locker rooms. It was simple, but revolutionary. Canada would no longer settle for being grateful just to qualify. They would demand respect. And respect came slowly, one match at a time. Qualification for the 2022 World Cup became the stuff of national theatre. Stadiums in Toronto, Edmonton and Hamilton filled with fans who had never imagined themselves singing soccer chants in sub-zero temperatures. Snow fell during the now iconic match against Mexico, the Iceteca. They called it a night that turned Canadian football into folklore. Davies was absent, injured, but his teammates fought like men possessed. When Cyle Larin scored, the roar pierced the frozen air. For once, Canada wasn't surviving, they were dictating. The moment Canada qualified for Qatar 2022 was electric. The final whistle blew, and decades of frustration melted into tears. Players embraced, fans sang the anthem off-key but from the heart, and a generation realized that football in Canada had finally found its soul. They didn't win a match at that World Cup, but they won something far more valuable: belief. That belief carried into a new chapter, with the announcement that Canada would co-host the 2026 World Cup. Alongside the United States and Mexico, the dream became real. Two Canadian cities, Vancouver and Toronto, would join a global rotation of football capitals. BC Place and BMO Field would be upgraded, expanded, and reimagined as temples of the sport. Streets would be renamed, fan zones mapped, public squares redesigned for the flood of visitors. But hosting wasn't enough. Canada didn't want to just welcome the world. They wanted to compete with it. And that meant transformation on every level: player development, coaching education, domestic leagues, even grassroots culture. The Canadian Premier League, launched in 2019, became the crucible for that ambition. For the first time, young Canadian players had a professional pathway without leaving home. Clubs like Forge FC, Pacific FC, and Cavalry FC became laboratories of local talent and tactical innovation. Fans began showing up in scarves and singing songs that echoed those of European terraces. Slowly, Canadian soccer was building its own folklore. Behind the scenes, Canada Soccer's technical staff drew lessons from the 2022 World Cup. The defeats to Belgium and Croatia hurt, but they revealed exactly what was missing. Herdman, ever the strategist, described it as a masterclass in humility. Canada could compete physically, yes, but tactically they needed refinement. The game was about transitions, decision speed, and psychological resilience. Against elite opposition, hesitation cost everything. And that's where the blueprint for 2026 took shape. A new generation of analysts and coaches began breaking down the DNA of world-class football. How did nations like Croatia, with smaller populations, reach the final? How did Japan outplay European giants through pressing and adaptability? The answers informed a system built around flexibility and fearlessness, a 3-4-3 that leveraged pace and verticality. At its core was Alphonso Davies, Canada's most electrifying weapon. His speed wasn't just an asset, it was a tactical philosophy. Get the ball to Davies, and anything could happen. On the opposite flank, Tajon Buchanan mirrored his dynamism, turning wing play into poetry in motion. Between them, Jonathan David waited like a panther, timing his runs with surgical precision. Behind them, Stephen Eustachio orchestrated the rhythm, distributing with calm authority. Under interim head coach Mauro Biello, who succeeded Herdman in 2023, the evolution continued. Biello, a Montreal native steeped in the culture of the Canadian Premier League and MLS, brought pragmatism to the ambition. His approach blended structure with freedom, a recognition that Canada's greatest strength lay in its unpredictability. "We're not trying to copy anyone," he said. "We're creating something Canadian, and that something Canadian was more than tactics. It was identity. From coast to coast, the game was changing. Kids in Halifax practiced Davies' signature bursts. In Calgary, young goalkeepers studied Milan Borjan's fearless reflexes. In Montreal, immigrant families who had once cheered for Italy or Portugal now wrapped themselves in the maple leaf. Football wasn't replacing hockey, it was joining it. The two sports coexisted, each representing a different heartbeat of the same nation. Canada's preparation for 2026 became a national project. Government funding expanded grassroots initiatives. Corporate sponsors who once ignored the sport now competed to plaster their logos on training kits. The media began to talk about Canada's tactical evolution with the same fervor once reserved for Stanley Cup playoffs. Football, at last, was part of the national conversation, but with belief came pressure. Expectations mounted. Could Canada on home soil do what no Canadian men's team had ever done? Advance past the group stage of a World Cup? Could they, in front of millions, prove that their rise wasn't a fluke? As 2025 turned to 2026, the narrative sharpened. The countdown began. Every friendly, every training camp, every youth academy drill was seen through the lens of history. The team wasn't just playing for results, they were playing for legacy. And in the midst of it all, Alphonso Davies stood as both symbol and son of the new Canada. His story, born in a Ghanaian refugee camp, raised in Edmonton, now a Champions League winner, embodied everything. This nation's footballing identity represented resilience, diversity, and the audacity to dream. Canada's journey from frozen schoolyards to global spotlight wasn't an accident. It was the result of thousands of small decisions, each one made by people who refused to accept the limits of geography or tradition, coaches who worked without funding, parents who drove hours to weekend tournaments, kids who trained under flickering streetlights because the fields were always booked for something else. Now, with the world watching, the stage was set. The lights would turn on, the anthem would play, and for 90 minutes, the nation would hold its breath, not hoping to belong, but ready to lead. The morning of the opening match feels different across Canada. The sky above Toronto is clear, the streets humming with anticipation. Banners hang from skyscrapers, trains carry fans in red jerseys, and on the waterfront, a giant screen plays highlights from the qualification run that brought them here. Every cheer, every goal replayed on those screens is a reminder. This is not a dream anymore. This is reality. Inside BMO Field, the stands are a blur of red and white. The pitch, pristine and perfect, stretches like a stage waiting for its actors. The world has come to Canada, a country once known for its winters, now ready to ignite its summer of football. The anthem plays. Cameras sweep across the players' faces, some calm, some visibly trembling. Alphonso Davies stands in the center, eyes closed, his hand over his heart. To his right, Jonathan David adjusts his armband. Behind them, goalkeeper Milan Borjan takes one last deep breath. The sound of the crowd rises, a collective roar that feels less like noise and more like history exhaling. And when the referee's whistle cuts through the air, the transformation begins. From the start, Canada plays with fearless urgency. The old hesitancy, the self-doubt that haunted earlier generations, is gone. They press high, move fluidly, attack with conviction. Their formation, a daring 3-4-3, bends between possession and chaos, designed to weaponize transition speed. Eustachio orchestrates from midfield, switching play to Davies on the left, who bursts forward like a flash of lightning. Every touch feels like a statement. Canada belongs here. But World Cups are not about declarations. They're about moments. Tiny fractures in time that define entire nations. In the first match, against a European powerhouse, Canada controls the first 20 minutes. Then, a defensive lapse. One through ball, one flick, one goal. The roar of the opposition cuts through the air. The scoreboard reads 0-1. Yet something remarkable happens. The crowd doesn't deflate. They rise higher. The chants grow louder. And the team responds. In the second half, Tajon Buchanan weaves past defenders, crosses low, and Jonathan David slides in to equalize. The eruption that follows could shake the lake beside the stadium. Strangers embrace, flags wave like wildfire. The final score, 1-1, a draw, but a declaration of intent. Canada isn't here to make up the numbers. They're here to challenge the narrative. Across the continent, in Vancouver, the second group match unfolds under the roof of BC Place. The stadium glows electric blue, the crowd trembling with energy. It's a night of resilience. The opponents press hard, forcing Canada to dig deep. Bourjan saves a penalty. Eustachio intercepts, starts a counter. Davies accelerates down the left, cuts inside, fires. The net ripples. The stadium explodes. Canada 1, opponents 0. The final whistle brings disbelief. Canada has its first ever Men's World Cup victory on home soil. The next morning, the headlines across the world read, "The North has arrived." For decades, the phrase footballing powerhouse seemed destined for other continents. But now, the Great White North stands shoulder to shoulder with the elite. Every news anchor, every pundit, every child with a ball at their feet feels it. Something fundamental has shifted. Yet, as always in football, joy is temporary and challenge eternal. The third group match brings heartbreak. A narrow defeat sends Canada through to the knockout stage, barely, on goal difference. But they are through. That alone feels like a small miracle. The round of 16, a nation on edge. Pubs are packed, city squares overflowing. Streets that would normally echo with hockey horns now pulse with football chants. The opponent is ruthless, clinical, experienced. But Canada fights with heart. Every tackle, every clearance, every sprint carries the weight of generations who never got this chance. Then, a moment frozen in time. Extra time, 1-1. A fast break. Davies surges down the wing, chased by defenders. He cuts inside, looks up, and threads a pass to Jonathan David. David strikes. The ball sails, kisses the crossbar, and drops over the line. Goal. Canada leads. The camera pans to the stands. Tears, disbelief, pure euphoria. The whistle blows minutes later. Canada advances. From coast to coast, the country erupts. Fireworks light up Vancouver's sky. In Toronto, horns blare until dawn. In Edmonton, where Davies learned the game on frozen fields, thousands gather in parks, singing the anthem into the night. Canada, the host nation, is in the quarterfinals. But every rise comes with its reckoning. Their next opponent is a global titan, a team of legends, the kind of squad that wins World Cups as if it's destiny. Canada holds firm, defends with discipline, counters with venom. Davies hits the post. David misses by inches. The fans live every second as if it's eternity compressed into 90 minutes. Then, late in the game, a corner, a header, a heartbreak. Canada 0-1. The run ends. The final whistle feels cruel, but not tragic. Because in that moment, the players stand tall. They've done something no Canadian team ever had, not just participate, but inspire. They walk off to applause that refuses to fade, applause that feels like gratitude and pride fused together. Back in the dressing room, silence. Some cry. Some stare into nothing. Then Davies stands and speaks. "Look around," he says. "We did this. We built this." No speech, no theatrics, just truth. The kind that echoes. Outside, the world takes notice. Analysts talk about the Canadian model, a blend of multicultural identity and modern footballing intelligence. Young players from across the globe name Davies and David as inspirations. The ripple effect has begun, and as the tournament continues, Canada becomes more than a host. They become the soul of it. Their stadiums overflow, their fans adopt underdog teams, their energy infects every city. Journalists describe it as the friendliest World Cup ever, a celebration that feels like a festival, rather than an invasion. The Canadian way, kind, inclusive, passionate, becomes the tournament's defining tone. After the final, as the champions lift the trophy, A different kind of victory is quietly unfolding. Canada's legacy isn't written in medals, it's written in belief. Youth registrations in football surge. The Canadian Premier League sees record attendance. Local academies expand. Investment flows in from sponsors who once ignored the sport. The wave has begun, and it won't stop. In the years following 2026, the stories multiply. A 10-year-old girl from Montreal says she wants to be the next Davies. A teenager from Winnipeg joins a CPL academy. In Toronto, a Somali-Canadian boy scores his first professional goal and dedicates it to the team that made us believe. These moments, small and scattered, are the real victories. And for the players, life changes too. Alphonso Davies becomes more than an athlete. He becomes a national symbol. His humility, humor, and global fame turn him into a bridge between worlds. Jonathan David moves to one of Europe's top clubs, his poise under pressure admired by all. Tajon Buchanan cements himself as one of North America's most exciting wingers. And in the background, Mauro Biello and Canada Soccer continue building for what comes next. The 2030s, the next generation. The continuation of a dream that once felt impossible. Football in Canada has evolved from curiosity to culture. No longer an imported passion, it's homegrown. Stitched into the fabric of identity, the Canadian Premier League expands into new cities. Fans in Halifax, Regina, and Ottawa chant songs in the cold, not caring about the weather. Football is now a Canadian thing. And perhaps the most powerful legacy of all is invisible, the shift in how Canadians see themselves. No longer spectators of global sport, but participants, competitors, believers. The 2026 World Cup didn't just change football in Canada, it changed Canada itself. It showed that this vast, diverse, multilingual country could come together under one anthem, one rhythm, one collective heartbeat. Decades from now, people will look back at this tournament not only for the goals or the results, but for what it symbolized, a nation daring to redefine itself through the world's game. From frozen fields to fevered stadiums, from whispers of doubt to roars of belief, Canada's footballing story has become one of the most remarkable transformations in modern sport. And as the lights fade on BC Place after the closing ceremony, Davies stands on the pitch one last time, looking out at the empty seats. The sound of the crowd still lingers in the air. He smiles because he knows this is only the beginning. A new generation is watching. A new dream has been born. And somewhere, across the wide expanse of the country, a child laces up a pair of boots, steps into the cold, and begins to run. Toward 2030, toward destiny, toward the next chapter of Canada's beautiful game. Because in 2026, football didn't just come to Canada. It became Canada, and the world will never see the Great White North the same way again. So as the anthem fades, and the stories of this tournament echo across time, one truth stands unshakable. History was written here, in the roar of the fans, in the rush of the game, and in the belief that sometimes the most unlikely dreams are the ones that change everything. And that's how Canada, the host that was never meant to be a contender, became a nation reborn through football. So, what about you? Do you think Canada can carry this momentum beyond 2026 and truly become a global football power? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the world's game.